What would you do if your fiancé left you for your own stepsister? Cry? Beg him to come back? Not me. I poured myself into an emerald satin gown, let my curls fall loose, and walked into their wedding on the arm of the city's most feared mafia boss. The champagne glass frozen in his hand. The look on her face? Pure venom. The ruin that followed? Entirely on purpose. 6 months ago, Andrew told me I was too much woman to love quietly. 3 weeks ago, he proposed to my stepsister in the same restaurant where he'd proposed to me. Nobody in my family called to check if I was okay. They called to ask if I was bringing a date. I almost didn't come. Then I thought about Chloe's face when she'd shown me the ring, sliding it under my nose like a dare, waiting for me to flinch. I thought about my stepmother's voice on the phone, sugar-coated and merciless. You understand, don't you? She makes him happier. So I said yes to the only person who'd ever looked at my too much and called it exactly enough. Drosy didn't ask why I wanted revenge. He asked what kind. Now we're standing in a ballroom dripping in crystal and old money, and Andrew's champagne glass is frozen halfway to his mouth. Chloe's veil trembles like she already knows. My stepsister spent her whole life making sure I felt small. Tonight, I take up all the room I want. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, slid between a water bill and a furniture catalog like it belonged there. Cream cardstock, gold foil lettering. Andrew and Chloe embossed so deep I could feel the letters under my thumb before I'd even registered what I was reading. I stood in my kitchen for a long time before I opened it, long enough for the ice in my glass to melt. Please join us in celebrating our union. As if there had never been a version of that sentence with my name in Chloe's place. As if Andrew hadn't sat across from me 8 months ago, swirling wine he didn't drink, telling me he needed someone lower maintenance. Someone who didn't take up so much space in a room. I'd asked him what that meant. He hadn't answered. He hadn't needed to. 3 weeks later, he was taking my stepsister to the same rooftop bar where he'd once told me I was the only woman who'd ever made him nervous. The invitation had a response card. RSVP by the 14th. Check 1 box. Joyfully accepts or regretfully declines. There was no box for what I actually felt, which was something closer to standing at the edge of a building and being asked to admire the view. My phone buzzed before I'd even set the card down. My stepmother. Of course. You got the invitation? Her voice had that particular brightness she used when she already knew the answer and just wanted to watch me say it out loud. I got it. You'll come, won't you? It would mean so much to Chloe. To all of us. A pause, calculated to the second. We don't want this to be weird, Alysia. Weird. As if my ex-fiancé marrying my stepsister was a scheduling conflict. As if the only thing required of me was to smile through it so nobody else had to feel the shape of what they'd done. I thought about every Thanksgiving where Chloe got the seat closest to our father and I got the one by the door. I thought about the engagement party I'd planned for myself that never happened and the one I was now expected to attend for her. I thought about how easily my family had refolded the narrative. Andrew and Chloe weren't a betrayal. They were simply meant to be, and I was the inconvenient detail nobody wanted to dwell on. I'll be there, I said. My stepmother exhaled like she'd been holding her breath since she dialed. Wonderful. Oh, and Alysia? We're something tasteful. You know how people talk. I hung up before I said something I couldn't take back. I set the invitation on the counter, gold foil catching the kitchen light, and looked at it the way you look at a wound that's finally stopped bleeding enough to see how deep it goes. They wanted a ghost at their wedding. Someone quiet, forgettable, dressed appropriately, and seated in the back. I had no intention of being anyone's ghost. The restaurant was the kind of place that didn't put prices on the menu, the kind where the maitre d' knew your name before you said it. I'd come alone, because some nights you need a room full of strangers more than you need company that knows your business. I was 3 sips into a glass of red when the energy in the room changed. It wasn't loud. That was the strange part. No raised voices, no scraping chairs. Just a current that moved through the space like a drop in temperature, and every head near the entrance turning a half degree without meaning to. He came in flanked by 2 men who didn't sit so much as post themselves at the edges of the room. He wore black like it was a uniform he'd stopped noticing, sleeves rolled enough to show ink crawling up one forearm, and he moved like a man who had never once had to wonder if a room would make space for him. It already had. The maitre d' practically folded in half, greeting him. Drosy didn't acknowledge it. His eyes were already on the dining room, scanning the way people do when they're cataloging exits, not admiring decor. They landed on me. I didn't look away. I'd spent the last 8 months being looked at, by my family, by mutual friends, by Andrew's mother at the engagement dinner I wasn't invited to but heard about anyway. And I'd learned there was only one thing you could do with that kind of attention: refuse to flinch under it. He crossed the room without being asked and stopped at my table like he'd been invited, which he hadn't. "You're not afraid," he said. "Not a question. Should I be? Most people are." He studied me a moment longer than was polite, the kind of look that wasn't undressing me so much as reading me. "You didn't even check who I was before you decided that. I don't need to know your name to know how to hold a fork." I took another sip of wine, unhurried. "You're clearly used to people rearranging themselves around you. I'm not in the habit." Something shifted behind his eyes. Not quite amusement. Something closer to interest, the way a man might look at a lock he hadn't expected to find difficult. "Drosy," he said, and pulled out the chair across from me without asking. "I didn't say you could sit." "No," he agreed, sitting anyway. "You didn't." Up close, the danger wasn't loud either. It sat in his stillness, in the way his men by the door tracked every person who came within 10 feet of our table. It should have unsettled me. Instead, I found myself studying him the way I'd been studied, cataloging, unbothered, refusing to be the smaller presence at the table. "You're somewhere else tonight," he said. "Even sitting right here." I turned my wine glass slowly by the stem. "Bad week." "Tell me." It wasn't a request. But for the first time in months, someone wasn't asking out of obligation or pity. He was asking like the answer actually mattered to him. So, for reasons I couldn't fully explain, I did. I told him everything. The proposal Andrew had taken back without ever using those words. The wedding invitation sitting on my counter like a verdict. My stepmother's voice telling me not to make things weird. Drosy listened the way some men perform listening, nodding at intervals, waiting for his turn to talk. He didn't do that. He went still, elbows on the table, and let me finish without once looking at his phone or the door. When I was done, he was quiet for a moment that stretched just long enough to make me regret saying so much to a stranger. "And you're going," he said finally. "Not a question. I told my stepmother I would." "Why?" The question caught me off guard, mostly because no one had asked it. Everyone else had assumed the answer, because that's what good daughters do, what gracious exes do, what women who don't want to be called bitter do. "Because if I don't, I become the story," I said. "The bitter ex who couldn't handle it. I'd rather walk in and let them deal with what that actually looks like." Something in his expression sharpened, like I'd said something he respected more than he expected to. "You want them to feel small," he said. "Not just uncomfortable. Small. I want them to understand they didn't get away with anything." He leaned back, studying me with the same unhurried attention he'd given the room when he walked in, like he was already 3 moves ahead of whatever I thought this conversation was. "I could go with you," he said. I laughed, short and disbelieving. "To a wedding?" "To that wedding." His voice didn't change, didn't lift with humor. He meant it. "You walk in on my arm, and every assumption your family made about how this story ends rewrites itself before you say a word. You don't know these people. I don't need to. I know what a room does when I walk into it. You felt it tonight." He let that sit. "Imagine what your ex feels when he sees it aimed at him." It should have sounded absurd. A man I'd met an hour ago, offering himself up like a weapon, like I was assembling something instead of just surviving an evening. But there was no performance in it, no angle I could find that benefited him more than me. "Why would you do this?" I asked. "What's in it for you?" He considered the question like it deserved more than a quick answer. "I don't like watching people decide someone is small enough to discard. I especially don't like watching them be wrong about it." I should have said no. Should have told him this was a business arrangement I had no business making with a man whose hands probably weren't clean. Instead, I thought about Chloe's veil, my stepmother's voice, the box marked "joyfully accepts." "Fine," I said, "but I choose the dress." For the first time, something close to a real smile moved across his face. "Wouldn't dream of choosing it for you." The boutique was the kind of quiet that money buys. No music, no other customers, just a single attendant who'd clearly been told to give me whatever I wanted and ask no questions about why. I'd worn black to every important moment in the last 8 months. Black to the dinner where Andrew ended things. Black to the family gathering where my stepmother first mentioned, gently, that Chloe and Andrew were getting close. Black felt safe. Black didn't ask to be looked at. I wasn't interested in safe anymore. The attendant brought out 3 gowns before she found the one. The moment she unzipped the garment bag, I knew. Emerald satin, off the shoulder, cut close through the waist before sweeping out at the hip, the kind of green that didn't ask permission to be noticed. It looked like something a woman wore when she'd stopped apologizing for the space she took up. I tried it on and stood in front of the mirror for a long moment, just breathing. Andrew used to say things like maybe something with more structure when I picked out dresses, like my body was a problem to be solved rather than worn. I'd spent years listening to that voice in my head before I even reached for a hanger. Tonight, looking at myself in satin that fit like it had been poured onto me, I understood what he'd actually been afraid of. Not that I'd look bad, that I'd look like exactly this. This one, I told the attendant. She brought out jewelry next, a necklace heavy with emeralds that matched the gown so precisely it looked designed for it, the stones cool and substantial against my collarbone. I added bracelets, gold against brown skin, until the whole effect stopped looking like an outfit and started looking like a declaration. The morning of the wedding, I sat in a chair while a makeup artist worked in slow, deliberate strokes. Bronzed skin, a sharp wing at the corner of each eye, lips painted the deep red of something dangerous and deliberate. She left my curls loose, framing my face in dark waves instead of pinning them into the polite updo I would have chosen 8 months ago. "You look like you're going to war," she said, half joking, stepping back to check her work. "I am," I said. "I just don't have to carry a weapon. I'm wearing one." When she finally turned the chair so I could see the full effect, I almost didn't recognize myself. Not because I looked different, but because I looked like the version of me I'd been quietly shrinking for years. Andrew had wanted lower maintenance. My family had wanted quiet. Chloe had wanted invisible. I stood, smoothed the satin over my hips, and let the necklace settle against my skin like it had always belonged there. Drosy was supposed to arrive in 20 minutes. I had no intention of being the one who looked nervous when he did. For the first time since the invitation arrived, I felt something other than dread climbing toward this wedding. I felt ready. He arrived exactly on time, which I hadn't expected from a man who seemed to bend most rules without effort. The car pulled up first, black, low, the kind of vehicle that didn't need a logo for anyone to understand what it cost. Drosy stepped out before the driver could open his door, and for a second I just watched him from the window, the way you'd watch weather rolling in. He wore black on black, the suit cut so precisely it looked less like clothing and more like something he'd been born into. No tie. The top buttons of his shirt left open just enough to show the edge of ink climbing his throat, the kind of tattoos that weren't decoration so much as history written somewhere he couldn't take off. His hands, when he adjusted his cuff, showed more of it, dark lines disappearing under his sleeve like a story with no clean beginning. He didn't knock. He didn't need to. I was already at the door. For a moment neither of us said anything. His eyes moved over the emerald satin, the curls, the necklace catching the porch light, and something settled into his expression that wasn't quite a smile, but lived in the same neighborhood. "You said you'd choose the dress," he said. "You didn't mention you'd choose a weapon." "I told you. I wasn't planning to arrive unarmed." He offered his arm instead of his hand, an old-world gesture that felt deliberate, like he understood exactly what kind of entrance we needed to make before we'd even left the driveway. The car ride was quiet in the way that good silence is quiet. No need to fill it with nervous talking. I watched the city slide by the window and felt him watching me instead of the road. "They're going to underestimate what tonight is," he said eventually. "They think you're walking in with a date. And what am I actually walking in with? A correction." I almost laughed, except there was no joke in his voice. He meant it the way he meant everything. Flatly, certainly, like a man who didn't waste words on things he didn't intend to follow through on. As we got closer to the venue, his demeanor shifted slightly, attention sharpening the way it had in the restaurant the night we met. Assessing, cataloging, already 3 steps ahead of any threat that might exist in a ballroom full of people in expensive suits. It wasn't performative. It was instinct, the kind that came from a life where vigilance wasn't optional. "Whatever happens in there," he said, low, as the car slowed at the entrance, "you don't flinch. Not once." I'll handle anything that needs handling. You just walk in like you already won. I looked down at the emerald satin pooling over my knees, at the ring of green stones on my wrist, at the man beside me who'd offered himself up as my deterrent without asking for anything in return. I think I already have, I said. The driver opened the door. Light spilled in from the ballroom entrance, chandeliers blazing gold beyond the glass doors. Drosy stepped out first, then turned, hand extended. It was time. The doors opened onto a room built to intimidate. Marble floors, a chandelier the size of a small car throwing gold light over 300 guests in their finest. White roses stacked so high on every table, they looked architectural. Nobody noticed us at first. That was the beautiful, terrible thing about a room like this. It took itself so seriously that for one full breath, we were just two more guests crossing the threshold. Then the current shifted. It started near the door and moved backward through the crowd like a wave finding the shore, heads turning in twos and threes, conversations dying mid-sentence. I felt it before I understood why. The weight of attention landing on us, heavy and total, the kind of silence that has a sound of its own. Drosy's hand settled at the small of my back, warm and certain, guiding me forward without rushing either of us. We didn't hurry. Hurrying would have suggested we needed to get somewhere. We were already exactly where we intended to be. I saw Andrew before he saw me. He was standing near the head table, champagne glass lifted halfway to his mouth, mid-laugh at something one of his groomsmen had said. The laugh died on his face in real time. His eyes found me, found the emerald satin, found the man beside me whose reputation apparently needed no introduction in this room, and the glass simply slipped from his fingers. It didn't shatter dramatically. It just fell, champagne spreading across white marble in a small, quiet ruin, and somehow that was louder than if he'd dropped it on purpose. Chloe turned to see what had silenced her new husband, and I watched the exact moment recognition hit her. Her face, dressed in bridal white and a veil that had cost more than my first car, went through three expressions in quick succession: confusion, disbelief, and then something far uglier settling into the corners of her mouth. She didn't move. She didn't need to. Her glare did all the work, sharp enough that I felt it land even from across the room. My stepmother found us next, one hand pressed flat against her chest like she was trying to keep something from climbing out of it. She didn't smile the way she had on the phone. She didn't say anything about things being weird. Drosy leaned slightly toward me, voice low enough that only I could hear it. Keep walking. So I did. Past tables of guests who'd gone quiet trying to place him, past murmurs already starting low and electric. Is that? I think that's. Oh my God. Past every person who'd ever made me feel like the inconvenient footnote in someone else's love story. I didn't look away from Andrew. I let him see exactly how unbothered I was. Let him watch me move through his wedding like I belonged there more than he did. Chloe's hand found his arm, gripping hard enough to leave marks. Though whether it was for support or to keep herself from saying something in front of 300 witnesses, I couldn't tell. The band, oblivious or simply professional, kept playing. We hadn't said a single word to either of them. We hadn't needed to. I'd gone looking for a quiet corner, somewhere away from the chandeliers and the whispering. Just 30 seconds to breathe before the night demanded anything else of me. The hallway behind the ballroom was narrow, lined with gilded mirrors and a service door propped open to the kitchen, glasses stacked in crates waiting to be cleared. Andrew found me there before Drosy did. Alysia. His voice cracked on my name. The practice charm I remembered completely gone. Up close, away from the crowd, he looked smaller than I remembered, tie loosened, color high in his face like the champagne had finally caught up with him. What are you doing? Who is that man? I was invited, I said. I checked the box. Joyfully accepts. Don't do this. He stepped closer, and there was something in his face I hadn't expected. Not anger, but something closer to panic. You don't understand what you're walking into. People in there are talking. About him. About what this means. What it means, I said evenly, is that I'm not the woman you left crying in an apartment anymore. I made a mistake. The words came out fast, low, like he'd been holding them since the moment he saw me at the door. I see that now. I see what He reached for my arm, fingers closing around my wrist with more urgency than I'd ever felt from him in 3 years together. Let go of me. Alysia, please, He didn't get to finish. A hand closed over his shoulder and turned him with a single, unhurried motion, and suddenly Andrew wasn't looking at me anymore. He was looking up. Drossi didn't raise his voice. That was the thing about him I'd learned to recognize. The less volume, the more danger. You put your hand on her. I wasn't. Andrew's voice had lost its certainty completely. We were just talking. You were holding her wrist. Drossi's grip on his shoulder tightened, just enough that I saw Andrew's knees waver. I don't like watching men decide a woman's body is theirs to grab whenever they feel entitled to an apology. I didn't mean. You never mean anything, Drossi said, until it's already done. He released Andrew's shoulder and stepped back, and for a moment I thought that might be the end of it. Then his hand moved fast, almost lazily, knocking the champagne flute from a passing waiter's tray. It shattered against the marble at Andrew's feet, glass scattering across his polished shoes, and Andrew flinched backward like the sound itself had struck him. Clumsy, Drossi said, not looking at the mess. Careful where you stand tonight. Andrew's face had gone the color of the tablecloths inside. He didn't say another word. He just turned and walked back toward the ballroom, unsteady, glancing over his shoulder once like he expected to be followed. Drossi turned to me, his expression softening into something almost gentle. You okay? I looked down at my wrist, where Andrew's fingers had left a faint pink mark already fading. I am now, I said. We walked back into the ballroom just as the best man tapped his glass for the toasts to begin, and I felt the room's attention find us again, quieter this time, more wary. Drossi guided me to a table near the front, close enough to see Andrew's hands shaking as he reached for Chloe's under the head table's white linen. The best man's toast was forgettable, the kind of recycled sentiment that could have applied to any couple in any room. Then he handed the microphone to Chloe's father, my stepfather, technically, though the word had never felt accurate, and the room settled into polite applause. Drossi leaned toward me. You said your family funded part of this wedding. His firm did, mostly. Andrew's. He told everyone he'd had a breakout year at work. I frowned slightly, not following where this was going. Why? Because my associate spent the afternoon making a few calls, he said, calm as ever. And it turns out Andrew's breakout year came from client funds he wasn't authorized to move. Money that was supposed to sit in escrow for people who trusted him with their retirements. I went very still. You're certain? I'm precise. There's a difference. He nodded toward one of his men near the bar, who gave the smallest answering nod back. It's already in front of the right people. Reporters who cover this kind of thing. A few of his firm's biggest clients, sitting at table 6, currently reading their phones. I followed his gaze and watched it happen in real time. A man in a navy suit at table 6 going rigid, leaning to whisper something to the woman beside him, both their faces draining of color. Then another phone lit up, 2 tables over. Then another. The murmur that spread through the room this time had nothing to do with Drossi or me. It moved through the crowd like fire finding dry grass, voices low and urgent. Did you see this? Is this real? Oh my God, his clients are here. Andrew noticed it before Chloe did. The way certain tables had gone from celebratory to grim. The way people who'd been smiling at him an hour ago wouldn't meet his eyes now. He stood up too fast, chair scraping against marble, panic written plainly across his face as more phones lit up around the room. What's happening? Chloe's voice cut through the band's quiet interlude music, sharp and confused. Andrew, what is this? One of the clients from table 6 stood, holding his phone toward Andrew like evidence. Is this true? Is this what you did with my mother's account? The question landed in the ballroom like a dropped glass, and this time there was no quiet recovery from it. Voices rose. Chairs shifted. Somewhere near the back, a woman in a navy gown was already on a call, voice clipped and furious. Chloe grabbed Andrew's arm, demanding answers he clearly didn't have, her bridal veil slipping sideways as she turned in a slow, mounting panic. I didn't say a single word. I didn't have to. Drossi simply reached for his glass, unhurried, and took a slow sip, watching the wedding he'd promised to destroy come apart entirely on its own merit. The ballroom had stopped pretending to be a wedding. Guests were leaving in clusters, some pulling out phones to call cars early, others standing in tight, urgent circles, still trading the news in hushed, electric voices. The string quartet had given up somewhere in the last 10 minutes, instruments lowered, watching the unraveling like everyone else. Andrew stood near the head table, looking like a man who'd aged a decade in 20 minutes, jacket off, collar open, a cluster of his firm's now former clients surrounding him with a particular fury of people who'd just watched their money evaporate in real time. He wasn't defending himself anymore. He'd stopped trying. Chloe had abandoned the head table entirely. I found her near the gift table, veil torn loose on one side. Mascara tracked down her cheek in 2 clean lines, screaming at a bridesmaid who'd apparently suggested she just try to calm down. Her bouquet lay crushed on the floor near her heel, white roses scattered like casualties. She saw me before I could decide whether to let her. "You did this." Her voice cracked across the room, raw with a fury that had clearly been building since the moment Andrew's glass hit the marble. "You couldn't just let me have one thing." "One thing, Alysia." I walked toward her instead of away, slow and unhurried, the way Drossi had taught me without ever saying the words out loud. "I didn't do anything," I said. "I just stopped protecting you both from the truth. You ruined my wedding." Andrew ruined your wedding the moment he decided his client's retirement money was his to spend. I let that land before I continued. "I just made sure you found out the same night everyone else did. Seemed only fair, considering how I found out about the two of you." She opened her mouth, something venomous already forming, and then seemed to realize there was no version of this argument she could win in front of the dozen guests still watching. Her face crumpled instead, anger collapsing into something rawer and more frightened. I didn't wait to watch it finish. I'd spent enough of my life absorbing this family's worst moments. I was done volunteering for more. Drossi was waiting near the entrance when I turned, hands in his pockets, watching the wreckage with the mild satisfaction of a man reviewing a job well done. He didn't say anything as I approached, just extended his arm again, the same way he had at my front door hours earlier. "Ready?" he asked. "More than I've been in a long time." We walked out through the same doors we'd entered, past the wreckage of white roses and abandoned champagne flutes, past guests who watched us go with the same stunned silence that had greeted our arrival. Behind us, I could still hear Chloe's voice rising, Andrew's clients demanding answers he didn't have, the slow, satisfying sound of a perfect day collapsing under its own dishonesty. The night air outside was cool against my shoulders, the city lights gold and indifferent beyond the circular drive. "No regrets?" Drossi asked, opening the car door for me. I looked back once at the chandeliers blazing through the windows, at the chaos I'd walked calmly through and out of. "None," I said. "I got exactly what I came for." I stepped into the car, emerald satin pooling around me, and didn't look back again. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel if you enjoyed this story.